Every morning starts the same way. I wake up at 6:30 without an alarm clock, look out the window at the sunrise over Scottsbluff, and think about how strange life is. 72 years on this earth, and I still haven't learned to sleep longer. Old habits die hard, especially those from a time when every minute counted. My house stands on the eastern edge of town, large, almost obscenely spacious for a lonely old man. 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a kitchen the size of my first apartment, and a veranda that overlooks the entire valley. This place was supposed to be a family nest for generations of Witherspoons, but now it's just me and my shadow. The morning ritual is unchanged. Coffee, peanut butter toast, 15 minutes with the newspaper, though now, of course, it's the electronic version on my tablet. The world is changing, and I'm trying to keep up. The porch greets me with the creak of floorboards. I sit in my favorite rocking chair and watch Scottsbluff slowly wake up. 10 years ago, I couldn't have imagined living in a house like this. 10 years ago, I didn't know where I would sleep the next night. "Mr. Witherspoon, good morning," came the voice of Ruth, my twice-weekly housekeeper, a short woman with wiry arms and a hairstyle that hadn't changed in 20 years. "Good morning, Ruth," I said, keeping my eyes on the horizon. "It's chilly today, so put something on," she said thoughtfully as she walked by with a basket of laundry. "I'm not cold, or rather, I don't feel cold the way I used to. Age dulls many sensations, but strangely it sharpens my memory. Once upon a time in another life, my day started even earlier. At 4 in the morning, I was already on my feet, preparing for another day of work in the laboratory. Westchem had been my second home for 35 years. Chemical formulas, calculations, experiments, all this occupied me much more than my own family. Every time I think back to those years, I see the same picture. Little Quentin standing in the doorway of the lab, holding some craft from school. There is anticipation and hope on his face, which is replaced by disappointment when I throw in a quick, "Not now, son. Daddy's busy." Not now. Those 2 words have haunted our entire married life. Not now, when he wanted to show me his first science project. Not now, when he scored his first goal on the school team. Not now, when his heart was broken by his first love. My wife Sylvia was the opposite. She knew how to listen, made time for all his questions and concerns. Sometimes I think she made up for my absence by being both mother and father at the same time. "Earl, he needs a father, not a ghost who shows up at dinner and disappears into his office," she said in a quiet but insistent voice. I nodded, promised to change, and plunged back into my work. Formulas didn't know how to rebuke, didn't demand attention, didn't disappoint. They either worked or they didn't. A simple binary system I understood better than the complex emotional needs of a growing human being. Once, when Quentin was 16, I missed his big debate performance. It was the state finals, and he had been preparing for weeks. Sylvia begged me to come, but that day we had a breakthrough in our lab on a project to clean up industrial waste, a subject I'd been obsessed with for years. "You have no idea what this means," I explained to my wife on the phone. "We've reduced toxicity by 30%. 30, Sylvia." There was a long silence, and then she said the words I still remember. "One day you'll realize, Earl, that the most important reactions don't happen in your test tubes." Quentin won that debate. I found out the next day when I found the trophy on the kitchen table and a note from Sylvia. "He dedicated the victory to you. Said he inherited the tenacity from his father." I put the note in my wallet and carried it with me for years, but never spoke to my son about it. Another missed moment in a collection of unlived opportunities. When Quentin left for college, I was almost glad. Now my absence wasn't so noticeable. I could work without feeling the silent reproach in my son's eyes. Sylvia devoted herself to volunteering at the local hospital, as if to make up for what she couldn't change at home. My son and I communicated infrequently and formally. Christmas cards, birthday calls, like distant relatives, not father and son. And then he met Avery. When Quentin brought her over to meet her, I was impressed with her ambition and business acumen. She was studying financial law and already had offers from several prestigious firms. Bright, confident, with a cool, analytical mind. In some ways, she reminded me of me. Perhaps that's why Sylvia was wary of her. She looks at it as a project, my wife said after they left. Like something to be improved. I brushed it off. I thought Avery was exactly what my son needed. Someone to push him to greater achievements. I was wrong about that, as I was wrong about so many other things. Sylvia's cancer was discovered suddenly and at a late stage, only 4 months from diagnosis to the end. She was fading fast, like she was in a hurry to get somewhere. In recent weeks, I finally did what I should have done all my life. Put work aside and been with her every minute. "Don't be stubborn, Earl," she whispered one of the last days she could speak. "When I'm gone, move in with Quentin and Avery. They'll need help with the baby, and you won't be alone." The baby was what she called their future child. Quentin and Avery were just planning a family, and Sylvia wanted so badly to live to see a grandchild. She didn't. At the funeral, Quentin kept a detached demeanor. He gave a flawless eulogy, chose the music perfectly, organized the wake just like a textbook proper goodbye. But in his eyes, I saw not only grief, but something else, an accusation. "She was waiting for you to notice the symptoms," he told me that evening when it was just the two of us. "You're a scientist, damn it. How could you not see?" The truth was that I really hadn't noticed. Sylvia always kept me out of trouble, always managed on her own. And when the pain started, she put it down to age. Didn't want to bother me, knowing I was working on an important project. I only went to the doctor when it became unbearable. It was too late. I moved in a month after the funeral. Not because I wanted to, but because I promised Sylvia I would. Their house, a neat 2-story cottage in a new neighborhood, seemed foreign and sterile to me. No extra stuff, everything in its place, like a furniture store showroom. Avery had given me a room on the first floor, a former office that had been converted into a bedroom. I'd put the bare minimum of stuff in there, putting most of it in storage. I thought it was temporary. I thought grief would bring my son and me closer together. The first weeks passed in an awkward coexistence. We treaded carefully around each other like strangers in a cramped room. Quentin left for work early and returned late. Avery, who had taken a vacation from her law firm, worked from home and watched me with poorly concealed irritation. "Earl, you left your glasses in the living room," she said, holding them out to me with her fingertips like I was contagious. We had an agreement that personal items were not to be scattered around the house. I thanked her and took the glasses, mentally noting that we hadn't discussed anything like that. Little things like that piled up. My mug on the wrong shelf, my books disturbing the design of the living room, my old man coughing at night disturbing her sleep. We hardly spoke to Quentin. It was as if he avoided being alone with me. When he did, the conversation didn't go well. "How are you doing at work?" I asked him. "Fine," he replied. "Any interesting projects?" The usual routine. And then the awkward silences and the relief when Avery showed up or the phone rang. But the worst were the nights when they whispered in the kitchen, thinking I couldn't hear. "You can see it's not working," Avery said. "It doesn't fit into our lives." "I promised Mom," Quentin replied in a tired voice. "What am I supposed to do?" "Your mother didn't know what it was like to live with him every day. She created an image of the perfect family man in her head, but that's not the man who lives in our house now." I pretended not to hear these conversations and continued to hope that time would heal the wounds. A ridiculous hope. Time doesn't heal, it only accustoms you to pain. 3 months later, something happened that should have brought us closer together, but finally shattered the fragile semblance of family. Avery found out she was pregnant. The news that should have brought joy exposed all of our problems. "We can't keep him here when the baby comes," she declared to Quentin. "The room on the first floor would be needed for a nanny. We can remodel the upstairs office," my son suggested tentatively. "Are you serious? An old man with bad knees who'll be coming down the stairs at night? What if he falls? What if he wakes the baby?" I heard all this while standing in the hallway with a cup of tea in my hands, which I went to take to my room. They didn't notice me in the semi-darkness, 2 figures, lit only by the light from the refrigerator. "He's my father," Quentin said quietly. "But you're right. I don't know how to go on." "He has money from the sale of the house," Avery continued. "He can rent an apartment. We'll even help him move in." I retreated to my room, set down my cup, and sat on my bed. My head felt empty and ringing, as if their words were echoing in it. I knew I'd become a burden, but to hear it like that, randomly, in the dark, The next morning, I struck up the conversation myself. Quentin looked guilty and unhappy. Avery looked determined and a little annoyed. I think I'd really better get my own place, I said, looking down at my plate of oatmeal. You need space for your growing family. Dad, we didn't want you to find out like this, Quentin started, but Avery interrupted him. It's the right decision, Earl. We'll help you find a nice apartment not too far from here. And of course, you'll always be able to visit us and the baby. Baby, the same word Sylvia used to call their unborn child, but it sounded different in Avery's mouth as a barrier, as something to be protected from me. There's no need for that, I answered, suddenly feeling oddly relieved. I'll be fine on my own. Quentin looked at me confused, as if he didn't recognize me. Perhaps he was expecting a scene, tears, recriminations, something to prove him right that I was an obnoxious old man. But I was too devastated for drama. A week later, I was already signing the lease on a small apartment in the old part of Scottsbluff. One bedroom overlooking the brick wall of the building next door, on the 4th floor with no elevator. The perfect place to disappear. It rained the day of the move. Quentin helped carry in the few boxes and awkwardly stomped through the door, not knowing what to say. Are you sure you don't need anything else? He asked, looking at the bare walls. I'm sure, I answered. Go home, Quentin. Your family's waiting for you. He nodded, made a motion like he wanted to hug me, but changed his mind and just patted me on the shoulder. We'll be in touch, Dad. That was the last time I saw my son, 10 years ago. He hadn't called or written or wondered if I was still alive. I didn't seek contact myself. Some wounds are better left untreated. I looked down at my hands, old, covered in age spots and scars from lab burns. Hands that never knew how to hold my son the way he needed to be held. Hands that clutched test tubes instead of little baby palms. Hands that now hold a cup of cold coffee on the veranda of a huge empty house. My gaze falls on the envelope lying on the table. A letter from Quentin's lawyer that arrived yesterday. The first news I've heard from him in 10 years. It's just dry sentences about family ties and inheritance. Ruth comes out onto the veranda, wiping her hands on her apron. Lunch in half an hour, Mr. Witherspoon, she says, and then pauses to add, You seem a little pensive today. Just thinking, Ruth, I said, keeping my eyes on the horizon. Just remembering. The first month in my new apartment, I woke up feeling like I was in the wrong place. Bare walls, an old creaky couch, minimal furniture. It felt like a temporary shelter, not a home. But did I have a choice? Scottsbluff is a small town where news travels at the speed of wildfire, and the story of the son kicking out the old man's father had already made its way around the local hobby groups. Walking up the stairs to the 4th floor with sore knees was a real challenge. Sometimes I'd stop on the landing between the 3rd and 4th, catch my breath, and think that Avery was right. I could have fallen on the stairs. Except it wasn't my health she cared about. It was the potential problems I could cause. My new life took on an unexpected rhythm. Morning coffee, a walk to the nearest park, lunch at Donnie's, a cheap diner where they already knew me by name, an evening with books or old movies. Sometimes I went to the local library, not so much for the books, but for the human companionship. Mrs. Hartley, a librarian of 30 years' experience, always found a few minutes for me to chat about the weather or local news. Mr. Witherspoon, how's your chemistry? She'd ask, handing me another detective story. You were a big shot in that field, weren't you? I answered evasively. Chemistry seemed a distant past, part of another person's life. My career at West Chem had ended 2 years before Sylvia's death. Downsizing, streamlining processes, all those pretty words that meant older employees were being replaced by younger graduates with modern attitudes and lower salary expectations. The savings were melting away. I divided the money from the sale of our house with Sylvia into 2 parts. One I put into a long-term deposit as an emergency reserve. The other I used for everyday expenses. I started looking for a job, but what could a 72-year-old chemist with outdated knowledge offer? Consulting? Teaching? There were no such openings in Little Scottsbluff. One evening, while sorting through another box of old things, I came across my notebooks. Dozens of notebooks scribbled in small handwriting. Formulas, calculations, ideas, sketches of experiments. Among them was a special one, in a black leather cover, worn from frequent use. My personal project, to which I had devoted all my free time until Sylvia's illness. a new method of purifying industrial waste, using a combination of biological enzymes and synthetic catalysts. As I leafed through the pages, my mind began to turn, like the gears of an old machine, with forgotten thoughts. There were answers to questions I hadn't even had time to fully formulate, outlines of ideas that were ahead of their time, jobs I'd abandoned when life took a wrong turn. I didn't sleep a wink that night. I spread the papers out on the floor, the only place I had enough space, and plunged into the calculations as if I were in over my head. By morning, my back was aching mercilessly, my eyes were watering, but my chest was filled with a feeling I had long forgotten, the excitement of an explorer who had found the trail. I began withdrawing small sums from my savings account to buy minimal lab equipment. The kitchen became a makeshift laboratory, a microscope on the dining room table, test tubes in the cutlery rack, reagents in the drawers of the cupboard. The neighbors must have thought I was a crazy old man when they saw me lugging home strange boxes and bags. "What is that smell, Mr. Witherspoon?" Mrs. Donovan, the downstairs neighbor, asked when she met me in the entryway. "It's like a sewer burst in the building." "It's just thiol compounds," I replied. "Don't worry, they're completely harmless." She looked at me as if I were explaining something to her in Martian. I understood her suspicions. An old chemist experimenting in an apartment building sounds like the beginning of a crime thriller. But I didn't care about social conventions. I was onto something important. The problem with my original formula was the instability of the enzyme complex at high temperatures. Industrial purification requires working with heated solutions, and natural enzymes denature as early as 60 degrees. I needed to find a way to stabilize their structure. The solution came unexpectedly. In the library, while looking through a recent issue of a scientific journal, I came across an article about thermophilic bacteria, microorganisms that live in hot springs at temperatures that are lethal to normal life forms. Their enzymes remain active even at 100 degrees. That was the key. I contacted the author of the paper, Professor Norton of the University of Nebraska. To my surprise, he not only responded, but expressed interest in my project. We began a correspondence that soon developed into a collaboration. "Earl, your idea of combining thermostable enzymes with synthetic catalysts is potentially revolutionary," he said during our first video call. "But you need a real lab, not a kitchen table." "I don't have the funds for that, Professor," I admitted honestly. "But I have a grant and an empty lab on Tuesdays and Thursdays." He smiled. "Samreikanom, would you be willing to drive to Lincoln twice a week?" Thus began a new chapter of my life. Twice a week, regardless of the weather, I took the bus to Lincoln at 5 in the morning and took the last bus back. 12 hours on the road for 8 hours of lab work. But it was worth it. Professor Norton, a 60-year-old enthusiast with the eyes of a young graduate student, became not just a colleague, but a friend. He was infectious in his optimism and believed in the project more than I did. "What we're creating, Earl, is going to change an entire industry," he said, looking at the results of another experiment. "Imagine chemical plants without toxic waste, rivers without acidic solution drains, soil without heavy metals." I nodded, but inwardly remained skeptical. Too many things could go wrong, too many variables, too many obstacles, and most importantly, too little time for an old man with arthritis and heart problems. The money continued to melt away. I saved money on everything: clothes, food, heating. I made a habit of eating at the university canteen on travel days. It was cheaper there. Norton noticed my frugality, but never commented. He understood. Thoughts of Quentin and Avery came less and less often. Sometimes I caught myself not thinking about them for weeks at a time. Work crowded everything else out. In rare moments of weakness, I wondered if my grandson or granddaughter had been born, what they had named him, if he looked like Sylvia, but quickly banished those thoughts. Some doors are better kept closed. After a year of intensive work, we had a prototype, a system capable of breaking down complex organic pollutants into harmless components with twice the efficiency of existing methods. Another 6 months later, a working model ready for field testing. "We need to patent this, Earl," Norton insisted. "Now." A patent meant expense $5,000 minimum, including all the legal formalities, a sum I didn't have. I'd already exhausted my savings supporting the experiments. "I have some money," the professor suggested. "I could invest in the patent in exchange for a share." No, I said firmly. That's not fair. You've already invested your time, your lab, your materials. I'll find another way. That way was to put a mortgage on my last valuables, the collection of rare chemistry books I'd collected all my life, and Sylvia's wedding ring. It was painful to part with them, but I consoled myself with the thought that it was temporary. If everything worked out, I'd buy them back. The patent attorney, Mr. Green, studied our application with a stony expression, marking something in his notebook. Mind you, Mr. Witherspoon, he said, taking off his glasses, even with a patent, you'll have a hard time competing with the big companies. They have armies of lawyers and million-dollar development budgets. If your technology is really as effective as you claim, they might try to circumvent or challenge the patent. Let them try, I replied with a confidence I didn't have. Our formula is unique. The patenting process took over a year of nervous waiting, additional experiments, revisions, and refinements. Every day I woke up thinking that someone might beat us to the punch, patent a similar technology, undo all our efforts. But that didn't happen. One rainy April morning, Mr. Green called with the news. The patent had been approved. Norton and I were officially the owners of a technology that could change the way we approach industrial cleaning. So what now? I asked the professor as we celebrated in the university cafeteria. Now we need investors, he replied, raising his coffee cup like a glass of champagne, or a license buyer. And I think I know just the right person. That person turned out to be Hiram Baird, a graduate of their university and owner of a venture capital fund specializing in green technology. Norton organized a meeting, and we presented our development. Baird, a tall, thin man with a shrewd eye, listened carefully to our presentation, studied the test results, and asked some pointed questions. Then he said the phrase that changed my life. Gentlemen, I don't want to invest in your technology. I want to buy it, all of it. Name your price. Norton and I looked at each other. We've discussed selling the license, but not a full transfer of rights. We need to think about your offer, Mr. Baird, I said cautiously. Of course, he nodded. But keep in mind that the realization of such technology on an industrial scale will require a huge investment. Tens of millions at the initial stage. Do you have such resources? He knew the answer. Two young scientists with a patent but no capital were easy prey for an experienced businessman. But Baird had another quality, honesty. I won't deceive you, he said, gathering up the papers. If the technology works as you describe, it's worth a fortune. And I'm willing to pay you a fair price. Think about what you want to achieve. Money? Recognition? Change the world? Perhaps selling the patent is the shortest way to all three. We thought for a week. Norton was leaning toward retaining control and looking for investors for incremental development. I was in favor of selling. At my age, long-term projects looked too risky. Think about the practical side, James, I urged the professor. How many years would it take to bring a lab model to commercialization? 5? 10? We don't have that kind of time. I certainly don't. But this is our baby, Earl, he argued. We put our hearts and souls into it. Are you really ready to just put it in someone else's hands? I'd rather see it work in my lifetime, albeit under someone else's supervision, than die knowing it's still a blueprint on paper. Eventually, we agreed to a deal, but with conditions. Baird would pay for the patent, but we would remain consultants to the project with a share in future profits. The sum was, impressive. More than I'd made in my entire previous life. I received my first check when the patent officially became the property of Baird's company. Holding the checkbook in my hand, I felt strangely empty. All my life I had chased scientific recognition, and what I got was money, a lot of money. Don't worry about it, old man, Norton reassured me, noticing my condition. You've earned it, and now you can do science without looking at the financial side. He was right, but I still felt strange, like I'd sold a part of myself. But that feeling quickly went away when I started receiving reports on the implementation of our technology. Baird wasted no time. Within 3 months, the pilot plant was operating at a chemical plant in Colorado, showing impressive results. I bought a new house, the same one I live in now. Not out of vanity, but because I was tired of the creaking floorboards and leaky ceiling in my old apartment. For the first time in years, I could afford comfort. News of my sudden wealth spread quickly through Scottsbluff. People who had not noticed me for years suddenly began to say hello to me on the street and inquire about my health. The banker who had previously been reluctant to give me cash from my modest account was now calling me himself, offering me special investment terms. "Mr. Witherspoon, we have a special trust management program for clients like you," he said in a husky voice. "Let me take you to lunch to discuss the details." I politely declined. I didn't need new friends brought to life by the clinking of coins. One day at the supermarket, I ran into Peter Hadley, a friend of Quentin's from high school. He worked as a financial advisor and seemed to know my business. "Mr. Witherspoon, what a pleasure to meet you," he exclaimed, shaking my hand with exaggerated enthusiasm. "I have heard of your success. It's marvelous. You're a true example that it's never too late to start over." "Thank you, Peter," I replied discreetly. "We should get together sometime," he continued. "I'm sure Quentin would love to know how you're doing." "Really?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "And how long have you been in touch with my son?" "Oh, we're in touch all the time," he said confidently. "Just last week we called each other." Peter was lying, and we both knew it. Quentin and his wife had moved out of Scottsbluff shortly after I'd been evicted. I'd heard about it from Mrs. Hartley, whose niece worked for the same company as my son. They'd bought a house in Denver, where Avery had gotten a position at a prestigious law firm. "Wonderful," I said. "In that case, the next time you talk to him, tell him his old man is still alive, if he's interested at all." Peter's face stretched. He started to mutter something about misunderstandings and busyness, but I turned away, continuing to pick fruit. Some relationships can't be repaired, even with money, especially with money. New money brought new opportunities too. I began traveling regularly to Lincoln, where Norton and I had started a small research group working to improve our technology. Baird didn't mind. A more efficient version meant new patents and new profits. Every month I received reports on the implementation of our development. The map on the wall of my office was covered with colorful flags, the places where plants with our purification system were operating: Colorado, Texas, New Mexico, then California, Oregon, Washington. Soon other countries, Canada, Mexico, Germany, Japan, were added. The technology was working even better than we had hoped. The amount of industrial waste was reduced by 70%, and the remaining 30% were converted into harmless compounds that could be disposed of by conventional methods. Baird's company grew by leaps and bounds, and my dividends grew with it. I became a millionaire at the age of 70. The amount in my account seemed unreal, especially after decades of modest life as a scientist. The money gave me the freedom to do what I loved without worrying about the mundane details of life. In time, I hired Ruth, a reliable middle-aged woman who came twice a week to keep the house in order. She cooked, cleaned, and never minded her own business, a quality I valued above many others. Life took on a new rhythm. Working with Norton, consulting for Baird's company, quiet evenings in the spacious house. I could afford the best doctors, the best drugs, the best food, but nothing could fill the emptiness of not having a family. Sometimes, on particularly quiet evenings, I thought of Quentin, Avery, and the baby I'd never seen. Money could buy a lot of things, but not a relationship ruined by years of misunderstanding. I'd learned to live with that thought, to accept it as a given. And then yesterday, the letter arrived. The first contact in 10 years, and not from my son, but from his lawyer. "Dear Mr. Witherspoon, in representing your son Quentin Witherspoon and his wife Avery Witherspoon, I inform you of their intention to resume family relations and discuss matters relating to inheritance law and the distribution of family property." Cold, formal lines written in the hand of a man who had never met me. There was not a word about my grandson, not a hint of remorse, not a single personal note. Only the language of money and legal technicalities. Next to the letter lay the morning paper with a note about the expansion of Baird's company and an estimate of its market value. My name was mentioned as one of the creators of a key technology. That's how Quentin found out. I wasn't looking for my father. I stumbled across news of his money. I folded the letter and hid it in my desk drawer. The lawyer said they'd be arriving in Scottsbluff in 3 days. Well, I had time to prepare for the meeting. Outside the window, it was getting dark. The lights of Scottsbluff were slowly coming on, painting a familiar pattern against the darkening sky. The city that had witnessed my fall and rebirth. The city to which my prodigal son was now returning, but not for forgiveness, but for money. I stood up, feeling my knees aching, a reminder that no amount of millions would cancel out old age. I pressed a button on the remote, and the heavy curtains slid smoothly over the eaves, cutting off the outside world. Ahead was a sleepless night of reflection and preparation for a meeting I never wanted, but now couldn't avoid. On the day of their arrival, I woke up even earlier than usual. The sun was just beginning to rise above the horizon, coloring the sky over Scottsbluff a soft pink. I stood at the window for a long time, watching the city slowly come to life. Somewhere out there, probably already on their way, were Quentin and Avery, my son and his wife, whom I hadn't seen in 10 years. Ruth had made breakfast, eggs, toast, fresh squeezed orange juice, but I barely touched my food. My stomach clenched with tension. "You're nervous, Mr. Witherspoon," she said, clearing away an almost untouched plate. "Is it because of your son's arrival?" "I guess so," I answered evasively. Ruth knew a little about my family situation, but I never told her the details. "Could I make something special for them?" she suggested. "Maybe an apple pie?" I shook my head. "I don't think this visit calls for a dinner party, Ruth, but thank you for the offer." She nodded understandingly and went about her duties, leaving me to my thoughts. I went into the office and reread the letter from their lawyer. The dry, precise wording left no doubt about the true purpose of the visit. They didn't write about reconciliation, about wanting to repair the relationship. They wrote about inheritance law and distribution of assets. It was as if I had already died and it was about my will. The doorbell rang. I glanced at the clock. It was only 10 in the morning. They'd arrived earlier than I'd expected. Taking a deep breath, I headed for the front door, trying to remain calm. Quentin and Avery stood on the doorstep, so familiar and yet so foreign. My son had aged considerably at 38. He had early gray on his temples and wrinkles around his eyes. Avery was still the same slim, trim, with immaculate hair and makeup. Suitcases piled up behind them, not one or two, but a mountain of luggage, as if they'd come not for a meeting, but for an extended stay. "Hello, Dad," Quentin said with a strained smile. There was no genuine joy in his voice, only awkwardness. "Quentin," I nodded, not moving from my seat. "Avery, Mr. Witherspoon." She extended her hand for a formal handshake. "You look beautiful." It was a lie. I looked like a 72-year-old man with arthritis and heart problems. But I accepted the compliment silently, shaking her cold hand. "Why don't you invite us in?" Quentin asked, shuffling from foot to foot. "We'd come a long way." I stepped aside, letting them into the house. They brought in 2 suitcases, leaving the rest on the porch. "This house is amazing," Avery said, looking around with ill-concealed admiration. "How many rooms are there?" 4 bedrooms, 3 baths, study, living room, dining room, I listed, watching her reaction. "A large kitchen. And this whole house is just for you alone?" There was something akin to reproach in her voice. As you can see, there was an awkward silence. We stood in the spacious hallway, 3 strangers, bound only by formal ties of kinship. "Come into the living room." I pointed to the door on the right. "Ruth will bring tea or coffee if you like." "Ruth?" Quentin asked. "My housekeeper." "Ah," he nodded understandingly. "You have a maid now." "Of course I do." There was a sneer in his tone, but I let it pass. We went into the living room, and they took seats on the sofa, while I sat in the chair opposite. A few minutes later, Ruth appeared with a tray. "Tea, coffee?" she offered. "Coffee, please," Avery said. "No sugar, no cream." "Coffee for me, too," Quentin said. "With sugar." Ruth poured the drinks and quietly walked away, leaving us alone. I noticed Avery glancing at her, eyeing her as if she were a piece of furniture. "So," I began, deciding not to delay the inevitable, "your lawyer contacted me, but I'd prefer to hear it directly. What do you want?" Quentin set his cup on the table and looked at Avery, as if seeking support. We'd like to rebuild our relationship, Dad," he said, choosing his words carefully. "The last 10 years were a mistake. We've all said and done things we regret." "Really?" I raised an eyebrow. "And when exactly did you realize that mistake? Before or after you learned of my financial success?" Quentin blushed. Avery, on the other hand, kept a nonchalant expression on her face. "It's not fair, Earl," she said, setting her cup aside. "We've always wanted a relationship, but we didn't know how to approach it. Your success just gave us an excuse. A reason to come with 7 suitcases? I nodded toward the hallway where some of their luggage was visible. We were hoping we could stay for a while, Avery said, to get to know each other better. This house is so big and you're all alone. I held back a chuckle. They hadn't even bothered to come up with a believable story. Where is your child? I asked, changing the subject. Sylvia wanted grandchildren so badly. Quentin and Avery exchanged glances. We have 2 children, my son answered. Ethan, 9, and Leslie, 5. They stayed with my mother-in-law in Denver. So I have a grandson and a granddaughter I don't know anything about, I said without reproach, just stating the fact. We sent you pictures for Christmas 2 years ago, Quentin countered. You didn't reply. It was a lie. There were no pictures, no letters, no cards, no phone calls. 10 years of silence, interrupted only after news of my money. I think we're getting off topic here, Avery interjected, clearly wanting to steer the conversation in the right direction. We're here not only to reconcile, but to discuss certain financial issues. That's it. She finally got to the point. What kind of financial matters, I asked, even though I already knew the answer. You see, Earl, she began in a tone she'd probably use in court, we believe that Quentin, as your only child, is entitled to a share of your estate, not after your death, but now. On what grounds? On the grounds that it's family money, Quentin interjected. You've always neglected us for your work. For years, you've put your research before your family. And now that that research has borne fruit, it's only fair to compensate us for what we've lost. I stared at him, not believing my ears. My flesh and blood son was talking about compensation for my paternity as if it were some kind of legal claim. Compensation? I repeated. Compensate for what exactly? Years of absence, Dad, he answered, showing emotion for the first time. All the times you weren't around. All the promises you didn't keep. All those wounds that haven't healed. And how much are those wounds worth, Quentin? I asked quietly. How much did you charge for every school event you missed? For every failed conversation? For every tear your mother shed because of me? He was embarrassed, but Avery came to his rescue. We've analyzed your estimated income, she said in a businesslike tone. We estimate that your share of the patent and subsequent developments has earned you about $20 million. We believe it is fair to pass 30% of that amount to Quentin and your grandchildren. $6 million, I clarified to make sure I understood correctly. That's a reasonable amount, Avery nodded. It will secure the future of your grandchildren, whom you were unfortunately unable to see because of circumstances. Circumstances. What a convenient word for the way they kicked me out of their house and cut me out of their lives for 10 years. And if I say no, we hope it won't come to that, Avery said with a smile that didn't affect her eyes. But if you insist, we can go to court. We have evidence of your inappropriate behavior as a father. We can seek compensation for emotional damage. It would be a long, unpleasant process that would undoubtedly attract media attention. I doubt Mr. Baird's company would welcome such publicity. It was a threat veiled in legal terms. They were going to smear me publicly if I didn't pay up. I looked at my son, trying to find in his face something of the little boy who had once waited for me from work, holding his drawings. But the man in front of me was a stranger, tense, avoiding a direct gaze, ready to blackmail his own father for money. Quentin, I turned to him, ignoring Avery. Is this really what you want? To come to the old man demanding money and threatening to sue him? We're not threatening, Dad, he objected uncertainly. We're just outlining possible scenarios. Scenarios devised by your wife, I suppose, I nodded. She's a lawyer, after all, an expert in this kind of thing. Avery pressed her lips together, but didn't say anything, letting Quentin answer. It's a joint decision, he said with pressure. We both believe we're entitled to a piece of your fortune. After all, if it hadn't been for Mom, you never would have created your formula. She supported you all those years, let you work when you should have been with your family. It was a low blow to use Sylvia's memory in such a context. I felt anger rising up inside me, but held it back. Anger is a bad counselor, especially in matters that require cold calculation. I see, I said, rising from my chair. You've thought of everything. Let me show you the house since you plan to stay here. They looked at each other in surprise but followed me. I led them through the living room into the dining room with its huge oak table, then into the kitchen where Ruth was preparing dinner. We went up to the second floor, and I showed them the bedrooms. Spacious, bright, each with its own bathroom. A family of 6 could live here without getting in each other's way, Avery said approvingly. It could, I agreed. Finally, we went back into the living room. They sat down on the couch again, clearly pleased with what they'd seen. Their eyes were sure that the job was done. They had both money and a place to stay. So, Quentin began, when can we move our things? Never, I answered calmly. They froze, not understanding. What do you mean? The son asked. I mean, you won't get a dime of my money, and you won't spend a single night in my house, I explained, looking them straight in the eye. You kicked me out 10 years ago when I needed a family. You haven't sought contact in all these years. You didn't let me get to know my grandchildren. And now that you know about my money, you're here with your hand out and legal threats. Dad, we just want... I know what you want, I interrupted him. You want my money, but you're not gonna get it. Not now, not after I'm dead. Avery straightened, shedding her mask of friendliness. You can't disinherit Quentin completely, she said icily. The law. I know the law better than you think, I replied. I've had a lot of time to consult with lawyers in recent years. I've already changed my will and set up a trust fund. All my money will go to charity, supporting lonely elderly people who have been abandoned by their families. Ironic, isn't it? They turned pale, realizing their plan was falling apart. You can't do this, Quentin said in a shaky voice. Sondheim, we're your family. Family? I grinned bitterly. Family doesn't just show up when you smell money. Family doesn't blackmail with threats of judgment. Family doesn't demand compensation for years of relationship. I stood up, signaling that the conversation was over. You have 2 options, I said, looking at their shocked faces. 1, you can leave now, take your suitcases and never come back. 2, you can sue me, try to smear me, make a public scandal. But keep in mind, I'm prepared for that. All my finances are secure, all my legal documents are in order, and I have records of your threats and demands today. If you choose this path, I will fight to the end, even if it's the last thing I do in my life. Avery was the first to come to her senses. You're making a mistake, Earl, she said, rising from the couch. We offered you a chance to be a part of the family, to meet the grandchildren. No, I shook my head. You offered me a deal, my money in exchange for a semblance of family. But I'm too old to play games like that, and I know you too well. Quentin looked at me with a mixture of shock, anger, and perhaps shame. You've always cared more about money than people, he said accusingly. Even now you're choosing them over us. No, son, I countered with a sad smile. I choose dignity, what's left of it at my age. And you know what? I can sleep easy knowing I didn't betray your mother's memory by selling her out for your fake smiles. He flinched when I mentioned Sylvia. You don't know anything about Mom, he exclaimed. You weren't there for her when she needed you. That's true, I agreed. And I'll live with that guilt for the rest of my life. But you know the difference between us, Quentin. I admit my mistakes. I don't try to monetize them. Avery took her husband's hand, keeping him from answering. We're leaving, she said coldly. But this isn't the end of it, Earl. We'll come back to this conversation again. No, I answered as I walked them to the door. You won't, because there's nothing else for us to talk about. They packed their bags in silence. Quentin cast one last glance at me. There was something uncertain in it, maybe a remnant of the bond that had once existed between father and son. But the moment passed, and they were gone, leaving me alone in an empty house filled with the echo of unspoken words. I watched them load their luggage into a cab as the car drove away from my house, taking the last remnants of my family away. A strange relief came over me, as if the weight I had carried for years was finally gone. Ruth appeared beside me, quiet and understanding. Aren't they staying for dinner? She asked, though she already knew the answer. No, I answered, turning away from the window. They wouldn't. She nodded and went into the kitchen, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I sat back in my chair, feeling strangely calm. 10 years ago, they had slammed the door in my face, leaving me homeless. Today I did the same, but on my own terms, with my head held high. Perhaps loneliness isn't the worst fate for someone my age. At least it's honest. There is no pretense in it, no self-serving motives, just the pure, crystal truth of who you are and what you mean to others. On the table next to me was a picture of Sylvia, the only one I'd kept. She was smiling that special smile that was meant just for me, despite all my imperfections. "I did it, Sylvia," I whispered, looking at her image. "I finally made the right choice. I hope you would have understood me." And I thought I heard her quiet, approving whisper in the silence of the empty house. I thought that with Quentin and Avery gone, there would be peace, that their disappearance from my life would be as final as it had been 10 years ago. I was wrong. The next morning on my way out to get the paper, I found my neighbor, Mrs. Parker, on the porch. The 80-year-old widow lived across the street and usually limited herself to polite nods when I met her. Now she stood leaning on her cane, clearly waiting for me. "Good morning, Earl," she said with deliberate concern in her voice. "How are you feeling?" "Pretty well, considering my age," I replied, surprised at her sudden interest. "To what do I owe this attention?" She lowered her voice as if sharing a secret. "I saw your son and his wife yesterday. They were leaving in such a hurry. Is everything all right?" News traveled faster than light in Scottsbluff. "Yes, everything's fine," I put on a smile. "They had urgent business in Denver." "Oh," she looked disappointed by my terse answer. "It's just that I heard there was some trouble." "From whom?" I asked, though I already knew the source. "Avery and I talked a little while she was waiting for a cab," Mrs. Parker admitted. "Such a nice woman. She's very worried about you, you know. She says you're refusing family help when you clearly need it. That you're becoming, pardon me for being blunt, a little forgetful." I stared at her, trying to keep my expression neutral. So Avery had already started her campaign, trying to create the image of a stubborn, losing his mind old man, rejecting the care of a loving family. "Mrs. Parker," I said calmly, "I appreciate your concern, but I assure you my memory and judgment are perfectly fine, and my relationship with my son is more complicated than it may seem." She nodded, but there was doubt in her eyes. The seed had been planted, and apparently not just in her mind. Over the next few days, I began to notice a change in the attitude of Scottsbluff. The grocery clerk, who usually chatted amiably with me, now spoke slower and louder, as if I were suddenly deaf or unable to understand normal speech. The bartender at the Old Lantern pub, where I sometimes ate lunch, began to hold my chair when I sat down, as if I might lose my balance at any moment. And at the drugstore, a young pharmacist offered special pill boxes with a timer so you wouldn't forget to take your medicine. I was stunned at the speed with which word spread. Quentin and Avery were clearly not wasting any time. But the real blow came when I walked into the bank for routine investment counseling. Mr. Holloway, my financial advisor for the past 5 years, greeted me with unusual formality. Instead of the usual handshake and joke about stock market quotes, he indicated a chair and perched on the edge of the desk, looking at me with professional concern. "Mr. Witherspoon, before we discuss your portfolio, I need to clarify something," he began. "We've received an inquiry from the law firm representing your son. They're interested in placing your assets in trust due to concerns about your wealth." I felt the blood rush to my face. "My condition?" I repeated, holding back my anger. "And what concerns were they?" Holloway looked uncomfortable. "They mentioned possible signs of incipient dementia, impulsive financial decisions, refusal of medical care." I said, "That's bullshit," I said. "Complete nonsense," I cut him off. "Do you have a single example of my impulsive financial decisions?" "No," he admitted. "You've been extremely judicious throughout our relationship, but I am obliged to report such requests." "I understand," I nodded. "What now?" "Nothing. Not without your consent or a court order," he assured me. "But if the matter goes to court, the bank will have to provide information about your transactions." I thanked him for his honesty and left the bank with a heavy heart. Quentin and Avery had moved from rumor to legal action. They did intend to declare me incapacitated in order to gain control of my finances. There was another surprise waiting for me at home. Ruth, my faithful housekeeper, was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, clearly upset. "What's wrong?" I asked, taking off my coat. She looked up at me, her eyes full of tears. "Mr. Witherspoon, a woman called me yesterday. She said she was a social worker, asked if I'd noticed any signs of dementia or other memory problems. And what did you say? That it was absurd, of course, she exclaimed, that you were as sane as anyone your age. But she kept insisting, asking about your habits, whether you have fits of anger. Thank you for your loyalty, Ruth, I said, sitting down beside her. I'm afraid my family situation has become a little confusing. It's because of your son, isn't it? She asked shrewdly. After that visit, I nodded, seeing no point in hiding the obvious. They want control of my money, and it looks like they're willing to go to fair. That's despicable, Ruth was outraged. I'll tell the judge if I have to. You're the sanest person I know. Her devotion moved me. In a world where even my own son was ready to declare me crazy for money, such sincere support was priceless. In the evening, Norton called. His voice sounded concerned. Earl, what's going on? I got a call from some law firm asking about your mental state while we were working on the formula. It was suggested that you might have had episodes of confusion. I sighed tiredly and told him the whole story of Quentin and Avery's visit, their demands and threats. Unthinkable, he said after a pause. Your own son? What are you going to do? Fight, I answered. What else is left? I'll talk to my nephew, Norton suggested. He's a great lawyer, specializing in just this kind of thing. You need a professional defense, Earl. I agreed, realizing I couldn't handle the legal machine Avery had set in motion alone. As a former chemical engineer, I could develop a formula for cleaning up industrial waste, but I'd get lost in the maze of laws without a guide. The next day, the local newspaper, the Scottsbluff Daily, ran a short article in the public news section. Son of famous inventor concerned about father's health. It referred in passing to a family conflict and attempts by relatives to provide proper care for an elderly scientist whose service to society is undeniable. No direct accusations, no mention of money, just a neat, outwardly innocuous article, creating an image of worried relatives and perhaps a stubborn old man refusing help. A classic example of information manipulation. I folded the newspaper and put it aside, not wanting to wallow in negative emotions. But the phone kept ringing off the hook with calls from concerned acquaintances and neighbors wanting to know if everything was okay and if help was needed. With each conversation, I became more and more convinced that Quentin and Avery were methodically destroying my reputation, preparing the ground for a legal attack. By the end of the week, Norton's nephew, Adrian Forrest, arrived in Scottsbluff for a consultation. A young but already well-respected attorney specializing in family law and elder law, he listened carefully to my story while making notes in his notebook. They follow a standard pattern in these cases, he said when I finished. First, they form public opinion, then they collect testimonies from neighbors and acquaintances about your alleged strange behavior. Then they file a petition with the court to declare you incapacitated. How do I defend myself? I asked. First, we need to gather evidence of your full capacity, he replied. A report from an independent psychiatrist. Testimony from people with whom you regularly do business, your financial advisor, your academic colleagues. Then prepare countermeasures in case of a trial. What countermeasures? Evidence of their selfish motives, Adrian explained. The fact that they had no contact with you for 10 years and only appeared after your financial success. Their demands for money during the visit. Recordings of conversations or witnesses would be desirable. Ruth was in the house during their visit, I remembered. She might have heard part of the conversation. That's something, the lawyer nodded. But we'll need more. Perhaps there are letters, emails, documents that confirm your version of events? I thought, I still have a letter from their lawyer with the original demands, and maybe they were less careful in their conversations with their neighbors than the newspaper article. Great, Adrian made another note. We'll be collecting all of this. In the meantime, I advise you to be especially cautious in public places. They may hire a private detective to follow you, hoping to catch something that could be interpreted as a sign of mental illness. I have to hide in my own city? I resented that. No, just be yourself. But remember, you may be watched, he advised. One more thing. Start keeping a diary. Write down all the strange interactions, phone calls, conversations you have with your neighbors. This will help us track their strategy. After the lawyer left, I sat in my office looking at Sylvia's picture. What would she say when she saw what our family had become? How would she react to her son's actions? Quentin had always been closer to her than to me. She understood him better, had a way with him. Maybe if she were alive, none of this would have happened. I was brought out of my reverie by the doorbell. It was Peter Hadley, Quentin's school friend, whom I'd run into at the supermarket a few months ago. "Mr. Witherspoon," he began, shifting nervously from foot to foot. "May I speak with you?" I invited him in, warily observing his restlessness. He declined the offered tea and got straight to the point. "I have something to tell you. Quentin called me last week. He asked me to testify that I'd noticed that you were showing signs of dementia. Said it was for your own good that you were refusing medical attention." "And what did you say?" I asked, trying to remain calm. "I agreed at first," he admitted, his eyes downcast. "Quentin and I had been friends since childhood, and I was used to trusting his word. But then I started asking around and realized it wasn't that simple. He disappeared from your life for 10 years and only came back after news of your patent. And now you've come to warn me?" I didn't hide my skepticism. "Yes," he nodded. "I will not perjure myself, Mr. Witherspoon. It's against my principles. And I thought you should know that they are looking for people willing to speak against you in court." I looked at the young man carefully, trying to gauge his sincerity. He looked genuinely embarrassed and guilty. "Thank you for your honesty, Peter," I said at last. "It's rare these days." "I've always respected you," he said, looking up. "My father worked at West Chem when you were the lead engineer there. He said you were the best in the business, demanding but fair. I can't be a part of what Quentin is doing. It's not right." After Peter left, I called Adrian and told him about the unexpected visit. He was pleased. "This is a valuable witness if the case goes to trial. But be careful. It could also be a trap, an attempt to get you to say something they can use against you." "Do you think Peter could have been recording our conversation?" "It's possible," the lawyer admitted. "In the future, if you have unexpected visitors, it would be better to have Ruth or someone else present." I agreed, feeling paranoia begin to take over my thoughts. Should I really be suspicious of everyone now? Turn into a recluse, afraid of my own shadow? The next 2 weeks passed in tense anticipation. I underwent medical examinations, met with a psychiatrist, gathered documents to prove my competence. Adrian methodically built a defense, preparing for a possible trial. And then one rainy Tuesday, everything changed. I was walking back from the bank when I noticed a familiar figure sitting on a park bench. Quentin, drenched in the rain, no umbrella, with an absent look in his eyes. My first instinct was to walk past. After everything that had happened, after all their manipulations and attempts to smear me, I wasn't in the mood to talk. But something about his posture, hunched, lifeless, stopped me. "Quentin," I called out, coming closer. He looked up, and I saw something new in his eyes, a weariness mixed with something like shame. "Daddy," he said quietly, "I knew you were out here at this time. I wanted to talk, without Avery." I sat down next to him silently, holding the umbrella over both of us. "I didn't know it would go this far," he began after a pause. "Avery hired a private investigator to follow you. She's looking for people willing to testify against you in court. Even talk to your doctors, trying to get information about your health." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, not hiding my suspicion. "Because it's gone too far," he said, looking me in the eye. "It's one thing to ask for a share of the inheritance, but it's quite another to try to declare you incompetent, to ruin your reputation. What did you expect, Quentin? That I'd just give you $6 million after 10 years of silence?" He lowered his head. "I don't know what I expected. It was all Avery's idea. She convinced me that we were entitled to that money, that it was fair after all the years you've been an absent father. And you believed it?" "I wanted to believe," he admitted. "Our business hasn't been going so well lately. Avery lost her job at the firm, we've got a mortgage, the kids' tuition bills, and then we saw an article about you and your patent, about the millions you made." I kept quiet, giving him a chance to talk. "When you turned us down, Avery was furious," he continued. "Said we'd get the money anyway, that there were other ways. I didn't think she'd actually try to have you declared incompetent. This is out of line." Why are you telling me this now? I asked, still not trusting his sudden candor. Because I remembered something, he answered, pulling a tattered wallet out of his pocket. He pulled out a folded piece of paper, an old yellowed piece of paper. Do you remember this? I unfolded the sheet and saw a child's drawing, a clumsy picture of a man in a lab coat standing next to a boy. Underneath the drawing, the child's scrawled handwriting read, "My daddy is the smartest man in the world. Someday we will make a great discovery together." A sudden lump of emotion caught my throat. Your school project, second grade. You wanted to be a scientist like me? Yeah, he nodded. I found it in some old stuff when we were gathering documents for the case against you. And I realized I couldn't do it. Can't betray that little boy who had so much faith in his father. I can't continue this war. The rain intensified, drumming on the umbrella over our heads. We sat in silence. Two people bound by blood and history, but separated by years of hurt and misunderstanding. What now? I finally asked. I don't know, Quentin answered honestly. Avery won't stop. She sees this case as a challenge to her professional abilities, and she wants that money, maybe even more than I do. What do you want, Quentin? I asked, looking him in the eye. What do you really want besides money? He hesitated, as if the question took him by surprise. I want peace. I'm tired of fighting all the time. For money, for status, for recognition. My mother always said that real wealth is not the numbers in a bank account, but the people who surround you in times of need. Your mother was a wise woman, I nodded. Wiser than I've ever been. She loved you, Quentin said suddenly. Even when she was angry at your obsession with work, even when she cried over your absence. She always said that behind your reticence, you were a good person, just not good at showing your feelings. Those words touched something deep inside me, an old wound that had never fully healed. Sylvia understood me better than I understood myself, and maybe that was the reason I'd missed her so desperately all these years. Thank you for telling me that, I said quietly. Quentin nodded and got up from the bench. I have to go. Avery doesn't know I'm here. She wouldn't approve. What are you going to do? I asked. I don't know, he repeated, but I won't take part in the trial against you. I can promise you that. He turned to leave, but I stopped him. Quentin, wait. Your children, my grandchildren, how are they? A faint smile touched his lips. Ethan looks like you, just as stubborn and inquisitive, always taking things apart to see how they work. And Leslie is just like Mom, same eyes, same laugh. I'd like to meet them someday, I said, surprised by my own words. Maybe someday, he said, and walked away, hunched over in the rain. I stared after him, not knowing whether to believe this sudden change. Was it a sincere impulse or another tactic in their intricate game? Could an old childhood memory really awaken something real in him, or was it just another manipulation? Back home, I recounted the encounter to Adrian over the phone. He was skeptical. It could be an attempt to put your guard down. Perhaps they realized that a direct legal confrontation would be difficult and decided to change tactics. Quentin is playing the role of the repentant son, hoping to gain your trust and ultimately your money. What if he was sincere, and I asked, if he really wanted to end this war? Then let him prove it with actions, not words, the lawyer replied. Let him officially withdraw all requests and claims. Let him stop the campaign to discredit him. In the meantime, we must remain on guard. I agreed, though somewhere deep inside I had a hope that there was still something of that little boy with the drawing in my son, that all was not lost. Ruth noticed my thoughtfulness at dinner. Is something wrong, Mr. Witherspoon? You look troubled. It's just old memories, Ruth, I answered. Sometimes they come back when you least expect them. She nodded understandingly and didn't ask any further questions, another quality for which I appreciated her. In the evening, sitting in my study, I pulled out old photo albums, years of life captured on paper. Sylvia on our wedding day, little Quentin on his tricycle, a family picnic by the lake, a high school graduation. Moments when we were a real family, before work swallowed me whole, before I started missing important events in my son's life, before I became an absent father. Could we have fixed what was broken? Meeting Quentin in the park left me confused. On the one hand, I wanted to believe in his remorse, in the sincerity of his words. On the other, years of experience had taught me caution, especially when millions of dollars are involved. A week passed without any news. No calls from Quentin, no letters from the lawyers. I almost believed that our conversation in the park had actually made a difference, that he had kept his promise and refused to participate in the legal harassment. Adrian, my lawyer, warned against over-optimism. A lull doesn't always mean the end of the storm, Mr. Witherspoon. Sometimes it's just a change of tactics. He turned out to be right. On Monday morning, I received official notice that Avery Witherspoon had petitioned the county court to declare me incompetent and appoint a financial guardian. The guardian, of course, was proposed to be herself, a paralegal with a background in finance. The petition listed evidence of my incapacity, refusal of medical care, a lie, impulsive financial decisions, an even bigger lie, episodes of aggression and paranoia, absurd, alienation from my family due to unfounded suspicions. Who's paranoid? The document was accompanied by witness statements. Mrs. Parker's neighbor recounted seeing me wandering aimlessly around the yard in my nightgown. I had once gone out to check out a noise in the backyard when a raccoon knocked over a garbage can. The pharmacist claimed that I had repeatedly forgotten to take my medication. I had simply decided to change my blood pressure medication to one with fewer side effects. Even Peter Hadley, in spite of our conversation, submitted a statement that I looked like I'd forgotten to take my medication. Conversation submitted a statement that I seemed disoriented and suspicious the last time we met. But the most painful blow was the letter from Quentin attached to the petition. Not a statement against me, as I had feared, but something far worse, a letter written with visible concern and pain, where he expressed deep concern for my mental health and agreed that a guardian should be appointed for my own good. Every word of that letter was saturated with fake concern and ulterior motives, especially the paragraph where he recalled how I had forgotten his birthday for the past 3 years. Of course I had, since we hadn't spoken in 10 years, or his fears that I might be an easy target for financial fraudsters, given my gullible state and vulnerability. Scumbag, I muttered, setting the papers aside. A two-faced lying bastard. I immediately called Adrian, who had already received a copy of the petition. "Don't worry, Mr. Witherspoon," he said after listening to my outraged comments. "We were prepared for this. We have independent medical reports showing your full capacity and documented evidence of their self-serving motives. They're using our meeting in the park against me." I still couldn't believe such a betrayal. Quentin twisted every word, every gesture, turned my caution into paranoia, my memories into signs of senile dementia. "It's a standard tactic in these cases," Adrian explained. "They take every opportunity to interpret your behavior in their favor, but the judge will look at objective medical evidence, not the subjective impressions of those concerned." "What now?" I asked, feeling cornered. "Now we prepare a response to the petition and counter evidence. The trial is scheduled for 3 weeks from today. Until then, I advise you to limit your contact with Quentin and Avery as much as possible. Anything you say can be used against you." I agreed, though the very thought of having to hide from my own son was humiliating. The next day, news of the lawsuit hit the local paper. The headline read, "Family Drama, Son of Famous Inventor Sounds Alarm About Father's Mental Health." The article quoted sources close to the family, talking about my growing alienation and paranoid ideas about stalking. Leaving the house became a real challenge. Everywhere I went, I felt stares, pitying, curious, judgmental. People I had spent years greeting on the street were now crossing the street or approaching me with exaggerated concern. "How are you today, Mr. Witherspoon? Do you need any help?" Even Ruth, my faithful housekeeper, became an object of interest. Neighbors stopped her on her way to work, asking her for details about my behavior. Then one day she got a call from Avery herself, offering her a substantial sum for truthful testimony about Mr. Witherspoon's weirdness. "I told her to go to hell," Ruth reported, dusting the bookshelves indignantly. "I offered her money, can you imagine? Me, as if I could sell out." "You could," I remarked. "It would improve your financial situation considerably." "I've learned one important thing in 25 years as a housekeeper, Mr. Witherspoon," she said, straightening up. "Money comes and goes, but your reputation and self-respect stay with you for the rest of your life." Her loyalty was like a ray of light in the darkness of intrigue and manipulation that surrounded me. Adrian worked tirelessly to gather evidence and testimony in my favor. Professor Norton provided affidavits of our academic work together, attesting to my clarity of thought and ability to do sophisticated analytical work. My financial advisor documented that all of my investment decisions were measured and rational. But our greatest good fortune came from an unexpected direction. A former law firm colleague of Avery's, having heard about the case from the newspapers, contacted Adrian. It turns out that Avery wasn't just fired, as Quentin claimed. She was asked to leave after it was discovered that she had systematically overcharged clients, pocketing the difference. The scandal was hushed up so as not to damage the firm's reputation, but the fact remained that my sister-in-law was dishonest. That might explain their financial difficulties, Adrian said, and their insistence on controlling your money. If Avery can no longer work in prestigious firms because of his tarnished reputation, they need a new source of income. Did Quentin know about this? I asked. He probably did, the lawyer replied. Such things are hard to hide from a spouse. Perhaps that's why he agreed to participate in this scheme against you. This new information explained a lot, but it did not make my son's betrayal any less painful. On the contrary, I could now see how deeply he was entangled in this sordid affair. The situation escalated when my bank received an official request to freeze my accounts pending a court order. Avery, using her connections in legal circles, managed to convince the judge that I could embezzle or hide assets. It's a good thing that most of my funds were already protected by the trust, but day-to-day financial transactions became problematic. They want to corner me, I said to Adrian, financially strangle me into agreeing to their terms. Exactly, he nodded. But we can use it against them. It's further proof that their concern for your welfare is just a cover for their financial interests. While Adrian dealt with the legal aspects, I decided to act on another front. If Quentin and Avery could manipulate public opinion using the press, why couldn't I? I contacted the editor of the Scottsbluff Daily and offered an exclusive interview about my life, academic work, and current family situation. The editor, sensing sensationalism, agreed immediately. The interview took place in my home, which in itself was a strategic decision. The journalist could see perfect order, scientific books on the shelves, my office with documents and calculations. No signs of disorder or strange behavior, which was mentioned in the testimony of neighbors. I was brutally honest about my relationship with my son, the years of being a workaholic and missing important events in his life, the death of my wife and trying to live with Quentin and Avery, how they'd kicked me out of the house 10 years ago and hadn't kept in touch until news of my financial success. I'm not a perfect father, I told the reporter, and I take responsibility for my mistakes. But that doesn't make me incapable, and it certainly doesn't entitle my son and his wife to my money earned after they cut me out of their lives. The journalist, a young man with sharp eyes, asked direct questions, sparing neither me nor my family. Some say you have become paranoid, suspecting everyone around you of wanting your money. What would you say to that? I would say it's not paranoia when people actually try to take your money through the courts, I replied with a smile. It's called common sense. The interview came out the next day, taking up the entire front page and spread. The editor didn't soften the edges, presenting both sides of the conflict, but the very fact that my version finally appeared in the public space was a victory. The photo was particularly effective. Me in my office, surrounded by books and scientific journals, with a clear, focused gaze, the exact opposite of the confused old man image Avery was trying to create. It didn't take long to get a reaction. By noon, my phone was ringing off the hook with calls from acquaintances, neighbors, and former colleagues expressing support and outrage at my son's actions. Even Mrs. Parker, the very neighbor who had testified against me, called with an embarrassed apology. I didn't know the whole story, Mr. Witherspoon. That's not what Avery told me. I'm ready to withdraw my application. Toward evening, Quentin himself showed up on the doorstep, unannounced, without Avery, with the face of a man cornered. Why did you do it? He asked me demandingly as soon as I opened the door. Why bring all this out in public? Why don't you come in? I suggested calmly. Let's discuss this in a civilized manner. I led him into the living room, where Ruth was already sitting, polishing silver. Her presence was not accidental. I wasn't going to be alone with Quentin, giving him a chance to distort our conversation in court. "This interview," he began, pacing the room nervously, "you made us look like monsters after your inheritance." "Wasn't that true?" I asked. "Aren't you trying to get control of my money through the courts? We are worried about your condition. You're pushing your family away. You're refusing medical care." "Not true, Quentin, and you know it," I interrupted. "You know I had a full medical examination last month. You know that there's nothing wrong with my mental health. And you know that the only reason you filed this petition is for money." He clenched his fists. "It's not fair. You made millions on a technology you've been working on for years, neglecting your family, and now you refuse to share it with your own son. Is it fair to demand a share in the success of a man you threw out of your life for 10 years? I asked. "Is it fair to show up on your doorstep with your hand outstretched, only to find out about his money? Is it fair to lie about his mental state in an attempt to declare him incapacitated?" Ruth coughed softly, reminding him of her presence. Quentin gave her a disapproving look, but kept his tone low. "We're not lying. We're really concerned. You've always been a complicated man, Dad, and now you're getting older, living alone, pushing away anyone who tries to help, including you." I raised an eyebrow. "The same son who hasn't called, hasn't written, hasn't taken an interest in my life in 10 years? The same one who promised in the park to stay out of the lawsuit against me and then wrote a letter in support of Avery's petition?" He looked away. "You don't understand. I didn't have a choice." "There's always a choice, Quentin. You chose money over integrity. You chose to support your wife's lies over protecting your father." My words seemed to strike a nerve with him. He sank into his chair, suddenly looking much older than his years. "You don't know what it's like to live with Avery when she wants something. She doesn't stop. Never. She's the one who insisted we move to Denver, even though I wanted to stay in Scottsbluff. She convinced me to sell my childhood home after my mom died. She, controls everything. And now she's controlling this attack on me?" I clarified. "Yes," he nodded tiredly. "After she lost her job at the firm? Because of financial fraud," I put in. He shuddered. "You know?" "I know, Quentin, just like you were covering for her." He rubbed his face with his hands. "I didn't know all the details, I swear. She said it was a misunderstanding, that jealous co-workers had set her up." "And you believed it?" I asked. "Or did you just want to believe?" Quentin didn't answer, but his silence was more eloquent than any words. When Ruth finished with the silverware, she went out quietly, leaving the two of us alone. But she left the door ajar so she could still hear the conversation. "Your interview made a difference," Quentin said after a pause. "Avery's furious. She's demanding I give a retraction, tell the truth about your condition. Wants to get the national media involved, make a big deal out of it." "What are you going to do?" I asked. "I don't know." He looked up at me helplessly. "I'm caught between a hammer and an anvil. If I go up against Avery, she could take the kids. She has connections, legal experience, and if you keep supporting that lie, you'll lose your self-respect." I finished for him. He nodded, and in that moment I saw in him that little boy who waited for me after work, holding his drawings. The boy who loved and believed in his father despite his absence. A boy who somewhere deep inside still existed under layers of hurt, disappointment, and other people's influence. "I can help you, Quentin," I said quietly, "but only if you're honest, with me and with yourself." "How?" There was doubt in his voice. "How can you help?" "Well, for starters, you have to withdraw your letter in support of the petition. Tell the truth about how Avery manipulated you into joining this case." "She'll never forgive me for that." Quentin shook his head. "Maybe," I agreed. "But you have to think about your children, my grandchildren. What kind of example are you setting for them by being involved in this sordid affair? What will they learn about honor, dignity, respect for their elders?" He was silent, pondering my words. I continued. "I don't demand that you destroy your marriage, but you must find the strength to stand up to your wife's wrong decisions. Remember what it means to be a man, not a puppet." Quentin flinched at those words, but he didn't object. There was something new in his eyes, a glimmer of determination I'd never seen before. "I'll think about it," he said, rising. "I need time." "We have time," I answered, "but not too much. The court hearing is in 2 weeks." He nodded and headed for the exit. At the door, he turned around. You know what's ironic, Dad? All these years I've accused you of choosing work over family, and now I'm choosing between money and you. It's not too late to make the right choice, I said. After he left, I sat in silence for a long time, thinking about our conversation. Quentin's unexpected confession was hopeful, but I wasn't naive. Avery wouldn't back down so easily, especially now that public opinion was starting to shift in my favor after the interview. I called Adrian and told him about my son's visit. It could be a breakthrough if he does withdraw his letter, the lawyer said, but I wouldn't count on it. Avery will likely keep him under control. What about the new information about her firing from the law firm? I asked. Could we use that in court? Already working on it, he replied. I'm gathering official documents and testimony. It would seriously undermine her credibility as a potential guardian. What about the request to freeze the accounts? I filed a motion to lift it as unwarranted. Given your impeccable financial behavior and the petitioner's obvious interest, we have a good chance. After the call, I walked out onto the veranda, looking out at the sunset over Scottsbluff. The town seemed peaceful in the glow of the departing sun, so far removed from the storm raging in my life. Ruth came out next, holding out a cup of tea. Are you all right, Mr. Witherspoon? I'm fine, Ruth, I nodded. I'm just thinking about how strange life is. I spent my youth working, sacrificing my family for scientific discovery. And now, in my old age, I have to fight with my son for the right to control the fruits of that work. Life is rarely fair, she said philosophically. But I believe that the truth always wins. Maybe not immediately, not easily, but it does. I hope you're right, I smiled. In any case, I'm not going to give up without a fight. They want war. They'll get it. That night I couldn't sleep for a long time, thinking about the next steps. Quentin could be the key to resolving the conflict if he could find the strength to stand up to Avery. But even if he didn't, I had my own trump cards to play. I was awakened this morning by a call from Adrian. Mr. Witherspoon, I have news. I just got a fax from the court. Avery filed a supplemental petition seeking not only financial custody, but also a compulsory psychiatric evaluation with possible hospitalization. What? I couldn't believe my ears. On what grounds? She claims your interview demonstrates paranoid tendencies and dangerous delusions that pose a threat to you and others. I squeezed the phone so tight my fingers turned white. This is out of line. She wants to put me in a mental institution so she can have free reign of my money? It looks that way, Adrian agreed. But don't panic. It's a standard scare tactic. The judge is unlikely to grant such a motion without a serious medical reason, which she doesn't have. What do we do? We file a counter motion presenting evidence of her bad faith, he replied, and I think it's time to use our information about her dismissal from the law firm. If she wants to play dirty, we'll do the same. I agreed, though the very thought of my relatives trying to put me in a mental institution for money was not only angering, but deeply saddening. How far had we drifted away from what it meant to be a family? In the middle of the afternoon, a courier arrived with an official notice of an upcoming psychiatric evaluation, scheduled for the following week at the request of the court. Even Ruth, usually calm and reserved, could not hide her outrage. This is unheard of. How dare they? I looked at the document and made a decision. We're not on the defensive anymore, Ruth. It's time to go on the offensive. I immediately contacted Adrian and gave him new instructions. Collect all evidence of Avery's manipulation, file a countersuit for defamation and abuse of the judicial system, and get the media to cover this egregious case. Are you sure you want an escalation? The lawyer asked. It could escalate the conflict even further. I don't want escalation, I replied firmly. I want to put an end to this madness. And if that requires going all in, so be it. The battle for my fortune, my sanity, and my dignity was entering a decisive phase, and I was ready to use all available resources to defend not only my money, but also my right to live my life as I saw fit, without interference from people for whom I was just a source of income. The day of the trial was unexpectedly sunny for October. The sky over Scottsbluff was clear, as if nature itself had decided to witness the decisive moment in this ugly family drama. I woke up early, long before dawn, and stood at the window for a long time, watching the town gradually awaken. Adrian arrived at 8, trim and collected, carrying a bulky briefcase full of documents, Our arsenal against Avery and her legal machinations. "How are you feeling?" he asked while Ruth made us coffee. "Strange, but calm," I answered. "It's as if everything that's going to happen has already been decided." "We have a strong case," the lawyer assured me. "Independent expert reports, testimonies, evidence of their selfish motives. I'd say the odds are in our favor." I nodded, but my thoughts were far from legal subtleties. I was thinking about the look in my son's eyes in a few hours, in a courtroom where he would be arguing against me, trying to convince the world that I was incompetent. How had we gotten to this point? At what point did misunderstanding turn into open hostility? The county courthouse, a massive red brick structure built back in the 1920s, looked imposing. Journalists were already gathered at the entrance. My interview in the local paper had attracted the attention of a larger publication, and now the story of the millionaire inventor who was being tried by greedy relatives to be declared incompetent had spread beyond Scottsbluff. Adrian and I walked past the reporters without answering questions. In the hallway, I saw Quentin and Avery sitting on a bench surrounded by their legal team. Avery looked impeccable, a strict business suit, perfect hair, a look of professional concern on her face. Quentin, on the other hand, seemed haggard, with shadows under the eyes of a man who hadn't had a good night's sleep in a long time. Our gazes met for a moment. Something flashed in his eyes, shamed, remorseful, but Avery immediately put a hand on his shoulder, as if to remind him whose side he should be on. The session began with the formalities of introductions, the reading of the petition. Judge Montgomery, an older woman with a shrewd eye, listened intently to both sides. Avery's attorney, a gaunt middle-aged man, began with an emotional speech about the tragedy of a family watching the slow decline of a once brilliant mind. "Mr. Witherspoon exhibits classic symptoms of the early stages of dementia," he broadcast. "Suspiciousness, unfounded accusations against loved ones, impulsive financial decisions, refusal of medical care. His son and daughter-in-law, deeply concerned about his condition, are asking the court to appoint a guardian to act in Mr. Witherspoon's best interests and protect his welfare." I listened to this lie with a stone face, not letting my emotions take over. Adrian squeezed my shoulder, silently reminding me of our strategy. Stay calm, show clarity of mind, let the facts speak for themselves. When it was our turn, Adrian was flawless. Methodically, with surgical precision, he broke down each of the opposing side's claims. He provided medical reports from 3 independent experts confirming that my cognitive functions were completely intact. He showed financial statements that demonstrated the rationality and consistency of my investment decisions. But the hardest hit was the documents from Avery's former firm confirming her dismissal for financial fraud. "Your Honor," Adrian said, "the petitioner, who seeks to gain control of Mr. Witherspoon's multi-million-dollar fortune, ostensibly to protect him, was herself fired from a prestigious law firm for dishonest financial practices. This begs the question, does concern for her father-in-law's health really motivate Mrs. Witherspoon, or do her interests lie on a different plane?" Avery's face contorted with rage. She leaned toward her attorney, whispering something fiercely. Quentin sat motionless, staring at one point in front of him. Then the parade of witnesses began. Neighbors, a pharmacist, a bank teller, all those who had previously testified about my strange behavior, now looked much less certain under Adrian's cross-examination. Many admitted that their words had been taken out of context or exaggerated. When it was Quentin's turn to testify, there was a tense silence in the hall. He stepped up to the witness stand, avoiding looking in my direction. "Mr. Witherspoon," Adrian addressed him, "you claim to be concerned about your father's mental health. When was the last time you had any contact with him before your recent visit demanding money?" Quentin swallowed. "We didn't keep in regular contact." "Be more specific, please." "When exactly?" 10 years ago, he admitted quietly. 10 years, Adrian repeated. "And in those 10 years, you never once expressed concern for his health or well-being? Not a single call, letter, visit?" "No." "And what's changed 10 years later? Why the sudden concern?" Quentin looked at Avery, then at me, and something in his face changed. He straightened up, as if making an important decision. "Because we found out about his money," he said clearly, to the horror of his lawyer and Avery. We came to demand a share of his fortune, and when he refused, we decided to gain control through the courts. A whisper rose in the hall. The judge called for order, banging her gavel. "Do you realize you are testifying under oath, Mr. Witherspoon?" she asked, looking over her glasses. "Yes, Your Honor," Quentin nodded. "And I want to tell the truth. All the allegations of my father's incapacity are false. It was a strategy my wife devised after he refused to give us the money." Avery jumped up from her seat. "He's lying." "Quentin, what are you doing?" The judge tapped her gavel again. "Mrs. Witherspoon, sit down. You will have an opportunity to speak." But it was too late. Quentin's confession had turned the tide of the trial. After a brief recess, during which Avery's legal team conferred feverishly, her attorney asked for a continuance to gather additional evidence. The judge denied the request. "In light of the testimony, including Mr. Quentin Witherspoon's confession, I find that a continuance is not necessary. All of the evidence presented indicates that Earl Witherspoon is fully capable and competent to manage his affairs. Moreover, there are substantial grounds to believe that this petition was filed in bad faith for the purpose of gaining control of substantial financial assets." She paused, looking around the room. "The petition to declare Earl Witherspoon incompetent is denied. In addition, I am forwarding the case file to the prosecutor's office to consider possible charges of perjury and abuse of the court system." The session ended, and reporters streamed into the room. Avery quickly slipped out a side door, surrounded by lawyers. Quentin remained seated in his seat, as if unsure of what to do next. I walked over to him. "Thank you for the truth." He looked up at me with tired eyes. "It's the least I could do. It's probably too late, though." "It's never too late to do the right thing," I said, quoting my own words to him earlier. "Avery will never forgive me," he said with a bitter chuckle. "Maybe," I agreed, "but you'll forgive yourself, and that's more important." We walked out of the courthouse together, weaving our way through the crowd of reporters. Adrian made a short statement, emphasizing the triumph of justice and thanking the court for its careful consideration of all the facts. Over the next few days, the story received extensive press coverage. The Scottsbluff Daily ran the headline, "Justice is Served, Court Protects Rights of Elderly Inventor." Larger publications picked up the story, presenting it as a cautionary tale about how greed can destroy family bonds. Avery disappeared from town immediately after the trial, taking her children with her and returning to Denver. Quentin stayed in Scottsbluff, renting a motel room. Their marriage appeared to be coming to an end. A week after the trial, he came to my house, not with demands or accusations, but with a sincere desire for a fresh start. "I'm not asking for money," he said, sitting on the veranda with a cup of coffee, "and I don't expect you to forgive me after everything that's happened. I just want to try to make things right, if you'll let me." I looked at my son, a grown man with graying hair, with lines of fatigue on his face, with eyes that finally looked straight, without quibbles. And part of me wanted to believe, to open up, to give us both a chance to right the wrongs of the past. But the other part remembered the 10 years of silence. I remembered how he'd let Avery kick me out of their house, remembered his willingness to participate in trying to declare me crazy for money, and that part couldn't be forgotten or forgiven so easily. "I appreciate your willingness, Quentin," I said finally, "and I recognize your bravery in court. You made the right choice in telling the truth. But relationships aren't built in a day or a week. They take time, trust, consistency, all the things we haven't had for years." "I understand," he nodded, "and I'm willing to work on it for as long as it takes." "Good." I held out my hand to him. "Let's start small. No big promises or expectations. Just, see what happens." And so began our cautious rebuilding of our relationship. Not the quick reunion that sentimental movies tell us about, but the slow, sometimes painful process of building bridges across the chasm of mistrust and resentment. Quentin found a job in Scottsbluff, not as prestigious as the one in Denver, but one that allowed him to stay close. Avery filed for divorce, demanding substantial alimony and sole custody of the children. A long process began in which Quentin fought for the right to see Ethan and Leslie. I stayed out of their divorce proceedings, but helped my son pay for a good attorney. not out of guilt or obligation, but because I saw his sincere desire to be a good father despite the obstacles. One day, 2 months after the trial, Quentin brought the kids to Scottsbluff for the weekend. The court finally allowed him to see them, albeit under the supervision of a social worker. It was a moment I was both looking forward to and dreading, the first meeting with grandchildren I had only recently learned existed. Ethan, a serious 9-year-old boy with my eyes and Sylvia's stubborn chin, held a wary expression. Leslie, a 5-year-old replica of her grandmother, was more open, looking at me and my house with curiosity. "Did you really invent a machine that makes water clean?" she asked, climbing into the chair with her feet up. "Not exactly a machine," I smiled. "It's more like a formula that helps purify polluted water." "Like in fairy tales?" she clarified. "A magic potion?" "In a way," I nodded, "but it's based on science, not magic." Ethan, who had been silent until then, suddenly asked, "Can you show me how it works?" Thus began our first scientific adventure together. We went down to my home lab where I performed a simple water purification experiment for them. The kids' eyes lit up when the murky liquid became crystal clear after adding a few drops of reagent. "It's like magic," Leslie exclaimed. "It's science," Ethan corrected her with an important look, but with the same awe in his voice. That day I saw in them an extension not only of my blood, but also of my passion for knowledge. And though I knew that our relationship with Quentin would never be perfect, that too much water had passed and too many bridges had been burned, I realized that I could give something of value to these children: attention, knowledge, time. All the things their father didn't give them. But the most important decision I made was not about the family. After everything that had happened, after Avery's attempts to take my money, after realizing how vulnerable seniors can be to financial predators, I decided to use my fortune to help others. One cold December day, I invited a notary, a lawyer, and several witnesses into my home. In their presence, I signed the papers establishing the Sylvia Witherspoon Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping single seniors in Scottsbluff and the surrounding area. The foundation will provide legal defense for those who have been victims of financial abuse by relatives or caregivers, I explained to the crowd. It will also provide practical help, from home repairs to social activities, so that older people don't feel isolated. A large part of my fortune was transferred into a trust managed by a board of directors that included Professor Norton, Adrian, and several other respected members of the community. I became chairman of the foundation, devoting much of my time to its development. The foundation's first premises was an old 2-story house in the center of town, converted into an office and community center. It soon became a place where seniors could get not only legal or financial help, but also just human companionship. Board games on Thursdays, movie club on Saturdays, tea parties and discussion groups. Ruth, my faithful housekeeper, became the center's manager, organizing its daily operations with an energy and enthusiasm that amazed all who knew her. "You've given me a chance to do something meaningful, Mr. Witherspoon," she said when I offered her the position. "Something more than just polishing silver." With each passing month, the foundation expanded its activities. We started a home repair program where volunteers helped seniors with limited resources keep their homes safe. We launched a grocery delivery service for those who could not shop on their own. Organized legal clinics to protect them from scammers and unscrupulous relatives. Each successful project, each gratitude from those we helped, filled my life with new meaning. For the first time in many years, I felt that I was doing something really important, not only for myself, but also for others. One evening, as Quentin and I sat on the veranda watching the sun set our new ritual that had emerged in recent months, he suddenly said, "You know, Dad, I keep thinking about what Mom said before she died." "What was that?" I asked, surprised by this turn in the conversation. "She said, the most important reactions don't happen in test tubes." At the time, I didn't quite understand what she meant. But now, looking at all you're doing with the foundation, the people whose lives have been changed because of you, I think she would be very proud. I was silent, trying to deal with the sudden lump in my throat. "She always believed in you more than you believed in yourself," Quentin continued. "And you know what? She was right." At that moment, looking at the approaching lights of Scottsbluff, I thought about the strange twists of fate that had brought me here, about the years spent chasing scientific recognition, about the money that came too late to make things right with my son, about Avery's attempt to take control of my life away from me, and about how all of these trials ultimately led me to creating something I could truly be proud of. I haven't forgiven Quentin completely. Some wounds are too deep to ever fully heal, and our relationship will never be as close as that of other fathers and sons. But we learn to coexist, to respect each other's choices, to find common ground through his children. My grandchildren, who now came to Scottsbluff regularly, despite Avery's best efforts to limit their contact with me. As for money, I never gave Quentin the amount he and Avery had originally demanded. Instead, I set up educational trusts for Ethan and Leslie to provide for their future without giving control of the funds to either their mother or father. Life at 72 has been fuller and richer than I could have imagined. Not because of the money, although it has certainly opened up new opportunities, but because of the realization that even the darkest moments can lead to unexpected discoveries, not in the lab, but in the heart. Every morning I still wake up at dawn the same way, watch the sun slowly rise over Scottsbluff, and think about Sylvia, about what she would say if she saw me now. Not the perfect husband or father I never became, but a man who had found the strength to start a new chapter. A man who finally realized that the most important reactions really do not happen in test tubes, but between people, in the invisible connections we make with our actions, our care, our time. And even though this new chapter started late, I was determined to write it without old mistakes, with a new understanding of what really matters in this life.